Hello, everyone. Welcome to Growing Productive Students Through STEM Education. I thought we'd take just a few minutes to go through our agenda. Today, I want to start out by talking about what STEM education actually is, why we need STEM in our schools today, how it is different from what we have been doing in the past, and within this time period, I will be giving you a little bit of time to do some self-reflection as well as some reflection within your groups. We will then go on to look at the characteristics of an effective STEM program and what to do to begin building that program, how it is connected to the next generation science standards, and what a natural fit it is at that point. And then we'll look at some sample STEM activities broken down by the different grade levels, K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and 9, 12. Once again, at that point, you will have a little bit of time for some reflection, either self-reflection, reflecting with a partner, or with your school group. And then we'll end it with some helpful resources where you can find some additional information, things that will give you some particular lesson plans that might help out, show you how to organize that STEM curriculum. So without any more said on that, let's jump right into this. Just a little bit about me. I live in Farmington, Arkansas. On the map here, you can see that's where my little white arrow is pointing. Farmington, Arkansas is it's kind of a rural community just outside of one of our major university cities of Fayetteville. I did serve as a writer for the next generation science standards, and it was interesting. My team was the engineering team, and so that was my primary responsibility, but we didn't really do a lot of our work until the physical science, earth science, and life science had kind of gotten started. So our team worked on practices. We also worked on cross-cutting concepts, and then went into working with engineering and also working as liaisons with the other teams. And then in April of 2014, I served as one of your facilitators at the NGSS Dubai Forum. Now, what I would like for us all to do is take just a minute, and there is a Q&A section on the side of the screen, and I would love for our audience to take just a few minutes to tell us where you're from, and if you don't mind just typing that right into the screen, that would be great. Okay, so what is STEM? The easy part is looking at the acronym. STEM is an acronym for science, technology, engineering, and math. However, in practice, it is much more. It is not just a standalone science lesson, a standalone technology lesson, engineering lesson, and math lesson. STEM itself is actually, it's a curriculum. Whoops, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. It's actually a curriculum that will enable our students to have the necessary skills to be college and career ready upon graduation from high school. And the whole point of this session is to have you begin thinking about the types of shifts that we need to make in our curriculum and in the way that we teach students to have them ready for this particular shift. Okay, so why we need STEM education? The graphic that I'm showing you is from the PISA assessment. It is the assessment that is done by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And if you'll look at the slide, you'll see that the students with strong performances in problem solving typically have a different type of curriculum than our students that have the lower scores. And we're going to talk about that. But the big concern here is in today's world, students have to have a lot more information than just the standard reading, writing, language, and speaking. To be globally competitive, they have to be skilled in science, technology, engineering, and math. The STEM jobs right now are increasing at twice the rate of other jobs. So if we don't prepare our students with the skills to go out and maintain that area, that's where our countries are getting in trouble. Nations, like I told you before, that have focused on the problem-solving skills are definitely outperforming other nations on these types of assessments. And if the students are outperforming in these types of assessments, they're also going to be outperforming in the workplace. And I did add a link to the bottom of this slide for you. It is a link to the 2012 PISA on the creative problem solving, and it does show some sample questions. I found it interesting that some of these questions are definitely just static tasks, asking the kids to make a decision based on the scenario that's presented. But there are also some that ask them to actually go in and they have to identify relationships. They have to look at the constraints and the systems. And then they get a little bit of time to do some free exploration. And based on the exploration, then they have to go in and make a decision and support that decision. And that's the problem where our students are having some problems, because typically in the past, we don't give them that free exploration time to do the problem solving, to actually come up with ideas and go back and test ideas and see if they work. So how is STEM different? Well, like we talked before, it is not separate, discrete subjects. And what we have seen a lot in the States is we throw a hands-on activity at the end of the unit and say that that's STEM. And in reality, it is not. STEM is ongoing. And so you can't just simply graft a science activity or a technology activity onto the curriculum that we have today and say that we're teaching STEM. And by the way, technology is more than just, you know, sitting down and doing a spreadsheet on a computer or putting calculators in students' hands. It should be an integral part of the unit of study being covered. So what STEM should be? If you will notice with the graphics, STEM is overlapping. It actually combines science, technology, engineering, and math together. And what we see then is the design process is usually the driving force. And then the subjects are integrated so that the connections are also emphasized, not just getting the right answer. And prime examples of these are the types of jobs that actually require the overlap of these particular things. For example, looking at biology, there are careers now where kids have to understand biology and chemistry, the biochemistry fields, biomechanics, biophysics, biotechnology, and bioengineering. And so those are just a few examples, but those kinds of careers are becoming more and more commonplace, and our students do need to be ready for that. So when we're looking at how STEM is different, the second thing is it really does focus on real world issues, and the students should be attempting to solve real world problems. And this generally does include problem-based learning, which lends itself beautifully to how STEM is organized. We always hear students say, well, when will I ever use this in the real world? Or why do I have to know this? If you can show them that what they are doing does address a real world issue, something that will affect them in their future, then you begin to see the improved achievement, higher level cognitive task, where kids have to actually do the scientific processes and do the mathematics problem solving to be able to solve that problem. And once they develop those skills here, it's going to carry over into their other classes. Another main difference is the role of the teacher. The days of the sage on the stage where the teacher is standing up in front of the room and lecturing, and the students are sitting back being passive learners, soaking up that information as little sponges, is really beginning to change. With STEM, we ask that the teachers serve as facilitators for learning. And the main difference in facilitating and lecturing, a lecturer is the content expert. The lecturer controls what's being learned in the classroom, and the participants have to adapt to what the lecturer is doing. Whereas with a facilitator is really more of a process manager. It's important that they have prior knowledge of the students and what those students have as far as their background information. The facilitator needs to engage the participant, and then the participants are actually sharing in the process, going from passive learners to active learners and becoming more independent, which in turn makes them a little bit more responsible for their own learning and makes that learning then more meaningful to the students. So the characteristics of an effective STEM program. Well, to begin with, if you have an effective STEM program, the curriculum is student-centered and it focuses on the needs of the individual learners. The students get some choice in their learning task. You give them the overall problem, then they look at that problem and they begin thinking and brainstorming and coming up with some ideas about their own solutions to the problems. The nice thing about this is that it gets these students motivated and more involved in the learning process. It's very unusual to see a student hanging back and not wanting to participate when you have this type of learning going on. And the thing that I also see interesting about this is it automatically lends itself to the differentiated learning and the diversity in instruction just from the way that the curriculum is set up. The important thing is that problems need to be open-ended. It shouldn't be something where students have to do one particular task to be able to solve the problem. There should be good communication and explanation when needed to help with understanding, but it shouldn't be so limited that it tells the kids, step one, do this, step two, do this, and so on, like our old time cookie cutter labs that we have done in science for a long time. One of the other big deals is giving them enough time to model solutions and practice problem solving. And that's critical. The time factor cannot be skimped on here because if you do not give them enough time to actually do the exploration, to do the brainstorming, to try out a model and test the model, then you're missing the whole point of STEM, which is developing that thinking process. And then finally, constructive feedback. And I will tell you, when you're working with students, the constructive feedback part, you have to train students to give constructive feedback. And the way I present it in my classroom is that if it's not going to be helpful, if it's just critiquing with no suggestions offered for improvement, then it's not constructive. And so this is important that that constructive feedback come back from the peers as well as the instructors, and then the students take that feedback and go back and have time to do some redesign and some more sharing. Okay. Let's take just a few minutes and think about this. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Think about how, I'll go back to this slide. Think about how you could begin to implement this in your classroom. You have 2 minutes to think about this part. Okay, your time is up. Hopefully you had a little bit of time to start thinking about how you could actually use some real world issues in your classrooms, how you can begin integrating the 4 disciplines, and how you can begin trying to solve these real world problems through STEM education. Because ultimately, that is the critical component of STEM that makes it really meaningful to your students and makes it an appropriate thing to do to get your kids to that next level so that they come out of your classroom being productive thinkers, being able to think creatively, and being able to think critically, because ultimately that is the goal. Okay, so if I can direct your attention back to the presentation, NGSS and STEM. Um, NGSS really does have a strong natural connection that is built right into the new standards. For example, engineering is embedded throughout K-5. Uh, and that was kind of an interesting thing because as the standards were being written, that was kind of bandied back and forth about the best way to combine engineering because that is a new change. And the decision was made that in the lower grades, embedding it makes it more meaningful to the students and would get it taught in the classrooms. And engineering design is a different way of thinking. And so it does really need to be taught. If the students get that training at the early grades, then it makes it, whoops, touch the slide, then it makes it a little bit easier for them to make that connection as they go through to middle school and high school. At the middle school and the high school level, though, you begin to see that engineering is both embedded and it is included as standalone standards. I will caution you about trying to teach it as a standalone, however, because doing a standalone standard, it doesn't give it the depth of meaning that it will have if you include it with the science that is there. And really the standards were intended to be bundled to begin with so that you could actually include the science and engineering together. There is a much stronger connection to mathematics in the new NGSS standards. And mathematics is actually part of the practices now that are included within these standards. Asking these students to do the application of math and to use math, especially in things like models and simulations. They can use mathematical models to actually prove their ideas, and then the use of computer simulations as well. And we recommend that NGSS actually provide the starting point for STEM education. And I'll show you how that works in a few minutes. But basically come up with the idea in science that you're trying to cover and then incorporate the other disciplines into that particular unit. There are some conceptual shifts, however. In NGSS, K-12 science education should reflect the real-world interconnections. Now, does that sound familiar? It's something we just talked about with STEM education and making it meaningful. The real-world interconnections are critical. It capitalizes on this as students design their problems to actually solve these real-world problems. It uses all the practices and cross-cutting concepts to teach all core ideas all year long. So it's no longer at the beginning of the year, here are my nature of science skills, and we're going to learn how to do this during the first 2 or 3 weeks of school, have a little quiz on it, and then move on and just learn content and become science trivia experts. Now we're asking them to really understand and really apply what they're learning in class. And so you will notice that the number of concepts actually go down, but the students do learn these concepts in more depth. The science concepts build coherently across K-12. And here, if you'll notice in the standards, the same ideas and the same details are not covered the same way every year. Instead, there is a progression of learning that goes from grade band to grade band. And when the standards were written, we really focused on K2, the endpoint. What should students know by the end of 2nd grade? 3-5, once again, the endpoint was 5th grade. What do the students have to know when they leave 5th grade? And then so on with the rest of the standards with the grade bands. You will see some similarities because there are themes that go across all of the grade bands. That's our cross-cutting concepts. However, the things that the students are being asked to do within those themes will vary in complexity. And it's critical then that the teacher should understand what the students knew before they got to their grade level and then what the students are going to be expected to do at the next level to make sure that we cover those standards in depth enough so that our students are successful. The focus is on core ideas. Facts and details are now being used as evidence, but not the sole focus of instruction. And that's where we get into the deeper understanding and the application of the content. One of the major shifts that you will see with NGSS is that science and engineering are integrated in science education from kindergarten all the way to 12th grade. The types of things that the kids are asked to do definitely vary in complexity, but we want our kids to come out of school not only being able to give us knowledge and show us what they've learned as far as facts, but also being able to apply that knowledge in the problem solving. And engineering really does lend itself well to showing that. And then finally, there is intentional overlap with Common Core. And you will see that the science standards do coordinate with the English language arts and with the mathematics Common Core state standards, which also lends itself well to STEM education. And in the standards, there are foundation boxes at the bottom of the page, and that coordination, where they've actually shown you where ELA fits in and where math fits in, it's all on that standards page with you. So if you have not had a chance to explore the NGSS website, I definitely recommend that you do that. Okay. Now, I know you cannot see what I have on this slide, but it is pulled out in the next two slides to let you see this a little better. But these are just some examples of embedded engineering. And over on the left-hand side of the screen, the very first standard is MS PS2-1. And I'll pull that out in the next slide. But that's the example we're going to use for embedded. And then on the opposite side, these are the high school standalone engineering standards. And you'll see that there are just 4 of them, but they are pretty complex, complicated standards. And so here's the middle school one. And this particular standard asks the students to apply Newton's third law to design a solution to a problem involving the motion of 2 colliding objects. With students, we talk about car accidents. We talk about, anything where you have impact that will affect those objects. And then please pay attention to the clarification statements, because these clarification statements do tell you how far to go with the students. But I will point out the assessment boundary was not really written for teachers. It was written for assessors that are going to put out the big test, showing them exactly how far to go with the test questions so that they fit what our students are actually learning in class. And you can see, once again, looking at this particular standard, how it does lend itself quite well to STEM, because this is a real world problem. And understanding how Newton's laws works, that would be the foundation then to begin understanding this problem. In high school, take a look at this standard. Evaluate a solution to a complex real-world problem based on prioritized criteria and trade-offs that account for a range of constraints, including cost, safety, reliability, and aesthetics, as well as possible social, cultural, and environmental impacts. That's huge. And that could be integrated really well when looking at energy. We use these types of standards when students are trying to decide what is the best energy source to use, as well as anything that will affect the environment. Environmental science can tie in very nicely here when you're looking at looking at the other side. If we do this, yes, it's going to help, but at what cost? And it's a great way then to start talking to the students about criteria, constraints, and looking at the big picture instead of just that tiny problem that they're working with. Okay, so STEM at the K2 level. This is an example of a simple STEM activity for, this one was actually geared to first grade. And the example that I have for you is to design a model car or another object that can be pushed or pulled along a path by using only magnets. And over on the right-hand side, the science is pulled straight from the standards. It is to analyze data to determine if a design solution works as intended, to change the speed or the direction of an object with a push or a pull. The students are also learning about magnetism at this level. And so they could actually move an object with magnets using pushes and pulls if they understand how to use the magnet within the object that they're actually building. The technology would be the timing of the car and using programs like Scratch. And this is it's a free program, and I did put the web link here. It is through MIT. Scratch gives the students the ability to program a character of their choice, and they can actually program in movements, and small children can do this. It's pretty easy to actually teach them, and once they've had some practice with it, they can actually, if they videotape their object as it's moving using a cell phone videotape even, then they can go through and they can show how their prototype worked and program in on the program like Scratch, and then they can show it to the rest of the class. And that's another way of incorporating some technology. The engineering design is built right into this, so that would be where you would start. And then, of course, in math, measurement and the data that they're collecting and the way they display that data. Okay, so at the 3rd grade through 5th grade level, this one is a little bit more complex. It is to design a house that can withstand an earthquake or 2 minutes on a shake table. And the reason that last part was thrown in is because, you know, obviously we can't control when the earthquakes happen. But I've done some interesting things with this with students, and actually letting them help design the shake table as well. And this is a great time then to introduce a controlled experiment, because depending on the shake table, their results may not be 100% accurate. In science, the standard that we're looking at is to generate and to compare multiple solutions to reduce the impacts of natural earth processes on humans. This is a 5th grade standard. And when you're looking at this particular I'm sorry, that's a 4th grade standard. I misspoke. It's NGSS 4, ESS 3-2. And when you're looking at the level of your students for 4th grade, a shake table can be made fairly easily by taking the lid to, say, a coffee can, that plastic lid, putting marbles inside a box lid, put that lid on top, and as they shake the box lid, that lid is going to shake all over the place. The marbles will move it around. You would have to have a way of controlling the shake so that you're going to get a fair test. And that's another thing then to talk about with the students is how can you make sure that this is a controlled experiment? How can you make sure it's a fair test? And then as you go through this, the students then can do some technology, and they can take a time to actually look at some research of where is this going to affect our people the most? Where are the fault zones? What types of homes are constructed in this region? Does the type of construction make a difference? And then you can actually take some video of the shake test for analysis. And that analysis can include the design of the house that the students built, but you can also begin to look at the design of the actual experiment. You know, where were the strengths? What were the weaknesses? How can we improve on our experimental design as well? The engineering design is built in, and this one also makes use of building a model, testing the model, and then definitely giving them time to go back and refine their designs and go back and try it again and see if they can improve on their time. And then, of course, the measurement and the data collected. And this will be a chance then to also talk about the difference in the type of data collected, that sometimes it's not always a number, you know, that sometimes it's actually making observations. Okay, so let's take just a few minutes on this one. And if you have any questions about what we've done with K2 and what we've done with 3-5, I'll take those questions now for just a few minutes. Okay, there was one question that came through about the PowerPoint and would the PowerPoint be shared? And yes, the PowerPoint will be shared with everyone. Kevin will be sending those out after the presentation is finished. If you didn't find the question and answer portion, it is over on your far right-hand side of the screen. Okay, if there are no further questions, then I will go ahead and show you the middle school level and the high school level. And then we're going to take a few minutes to do some reflection and do some thinking within the next two slides again. Okay, so let's look at a STEM lesson at the 6-8 level. And the problem here is to design a lunchbox that will keep a warm container of soup warm and a cold bottle of water cold. Construct and test your model, then revise your design for optimal results. This is one where you would really need to talk to the students about the fact that the warm container and the cold container are inside the same lunchbox. And I will go back and answer the question in just a few minutes on grade 3. So when they're designing the lunchbox, in my classroom, I have tables that just have a myriad assortment of materials. Usually it is material that you don't have to go out and spend a lot of money on. And that's the other critical thing here. It does not take a lot of money to do this. I start out by using packing peanuts, bubble wrap, whatever that you have that has, if you have anything that's come to your school packaged, save that packing material. I have containers, which is all kinds of stuff like that stored. And then whenever you get ready to start doing the design, the students are able to use that kind of material. They're also able to use things that they bring from home. However, you do need to talk about what's okay and what's not okay, and definitely make sure that they get that approved ahead of time. That way you don't end up with just a packaged lunchbox that comes in with the material already done. You want the kids to actually do the designing. And so that's going to be kind of critical here. The technology will vary. Depending on the level of your students, you can use temperature probes. If you don't have that available to you, you can also use digital thermometers, standard thermometers, anything that will let you do a quick test. But you do need to talk to your students again about controlling the experiment and making sure that they don't have everything just open so that it's exposed to the air the whole time. It is supposed to be inside the lunchbox. And so, you'll have to talk about, how are we going to conduct the test and come up with those type of parameters that all of your students have to follow to be able to compare data. Okay, I'm going to go back to the questions for just a minute. Okay, so sample for the location for the sample lessons. At the end of the slide, I do have resources where I will be sharing where you can find some lessons. Also, my email will be available, and I'll be more than welcome, more than happy to share with you anything that I have. To create an inquiry-based hands-on assessment, the main thing is to look at the science that is there, pick that out, and then start thinking about how does it fit in with a problem. The hands-on assessment on a topic like fossils, I'm working with that right now with my students, and we're doing it through conducting a science symposium. The students are looking at fossil records, and we've learned about superposition and how they can tell from layers what is older than another layer, because our students are not old enough yet to understand things like carbon dating and some of the higher level sciences there. But as far as looking at what the fossil tells us about the environment, they can look and see that, for example, in an area that is now desert-like, they may find fossils of sea creatures. and you have to have them start thinking, well, how did the sea creature get there? And this can even be then used to teach them about uplift. If you're sitting on a plate boundary and how that affected like the landforms, so you can have fossils at the top of a mountain that used to be at sea level. And then my assessment is going to be the actual science symposium where the students are going to actually argue their viewpoints, and they learn how to listen constructively, give the constructive criticism, and argue back and forth until they have a claim that they can fully support by evidence. And so this then builds on that literacy standard and teaches them the communication aspect as well. Okay, good questions. All right. Whoops, I skipped 912. So at the 912 level, this one is one that students just have some fun with. It's technically not a real world problem, but it's showing that you can also have a little bit of fun while you're doing this. At the 912 level, they look at energy and energy conversion. Them to Rube Goldberg here, and I do have a handout or a link to the Rube Goldberg here because there's actually a big competition where your students can design this, make it work, videotape it, and submit the Rube Goldberg. But in this one, their requirement is to basically they need to build the device. It should have, whoops, sorry. It should have at least 8 unique stages, and that keeps them from just putting up a solar cell connected to a little car and they're finished. But they have to design, they have to build, and they have to refine the device that works within given constraints. And when I do this with students, I have them do the design part independently, working within their team, brainstorming. I usually give them big whiteboards to put on their table. And we draw it all out then with dry erase markers. When they go back and redesign, then they can use a different color of marker and you can kind of see the stages of their thinking. And then they have to get their device approved by the facilitator in the classroom, the teacher, before they begin building it. And that way you can make sure that they do have the stages there ahead of time. And then give them the time to, once again, test it, see if it works, and then refine it. And once again, great time to start talking about the criteria, which would be the 8 unique stages. It has to have the energy conversions and the constraints, which you might want to, at this point, limit them on the type of materials that they can use. Give them a time constraint, definitely. Give them a dollar constraint. And then the technology with these, if you have them actually doing the energy conversions, they can start using some of the Logger Pro software. They can use force plates to see how things, the energy that is lost if, say, they have a ball rolling down through this, once it impacts. You're looking at the design process again, and I would make the students draw diagrams and label diagrams here to actually show you the engineering design process. And then with math, you can go pretty deep with this. They can start calculating accelerations. They can apply physics formulas for potential energy, force of impact, just tons and tons of stuff that's available through that. All right, I'm going to look at your questions for just a minute. Okay. Okay, with the IB units of inquiry, that's one that I am not super familiar with. I haven't taught in an IB school, but I will tell you that we had people that worked with IB as part of our writing team. And so as far as being able to fit it in, I would assume that it would work well, but that's one that I would have to look at a little bit more. I will do some research on that and send that to Kevin. Okay. Yes, there are some activities at the end of the training, and I do have some things for you to look at as far as how this could look in a school, what needs to be in place in your school, some brainstorming, and some other things that you can take back into your schools, into your meetings. So yes, that time will come up. Okay. And Here is one of our reflections. So let's take the time to look at this for just a minute. I do want you to look at a partner if possible. Now, if you're on your own, if you're on your own, you can take the time to do this brainstorming, put it down on paper. But I do want you to take about 2 minutes for just a second here. And let's do a think, pair, share. With a think, pair, share, you have two partners working together. Partner A gets a minute to talk. Partner B has to listen. And then partner B follows with 1 additional minute. And then basically you can bat ideas off of each other here. And so what I want you to think about right now is, how could you begin to implement an effective STEM program? How could you build that program within your school? And the links that I have on the bottom of the screen are for you when we finish this. But some suggestions for what you could actually do. So if that helps you some, feel free to use those links if you have that availability. But basically, I want you to think, what does a STEM program entail? What are you using right now already at your school? How can you take the materials that you have and begin to incorporate STEM? And how can you actually apply these real world problems? And so this is a case of where you might want to start actually thinking in terms of the real world problem first. What types of problems could you focus on? And if you can get teams of teachers building these lessons together and building this curriculum together, it works much, much better than when one teacher is trying to do it alone. So let's take 2 minutes to think about what steps we need in order to begin doing this within our schools. And your time begins now. Let's switch off to partner B now talking. And let's stop for a minute. Now, I know that you probably still have a lot of questions, so we're going to take a few minutes to look at some additional things with this. How to actually put together a great STEM lesson. And this is just some basics for a classroom teacher working with STEM in their classroom for the first time. If you go through these 10 steps, number 1, connect the topic to the real world problem. Make sure that the students understand what is the challenge that they have to solve. Because if they don't understand the problem, you're going to spend a lot of time going back and redefining the problem for the students. The clearly defined problem could begin with some good brainstorming within the classroom. And after you have the kids input with that, a lot of times then you have that good depth of understanding to begin. We recommend that you introduce with a scenario that lays out the problem and captures their interest. So begin with something you can show. And I've used little YouTube clips and things like that. Anything that you can tweak their interest. Right now, we're looking at flu outbreaks in our region. That's one of our scenarios. You know, what can we do to minimize the outbreak of flu within the public school? And then that then gives them time then to go out and start solving a problem that does affect them. The students need to be involved in researching the content. Don't give them everything. At that point, then you as the teacher are doing the thinking instead of the students doing the thinking. Do identify the criteria and constraints ahead of time. Criteria is what their model, what their prototype has to do, what their solution has to do. Constraints, clearly define those. Otherwise, what you see a lot of times is you'll have students that try to go out and buy a prepackaged answer. And so this is where you can tell them, you know, this is what you have to do. This is what you have to show me. These are your limits. You cannot go out and, you know, buy a kit to build and show me that you have your answer, but you actually have to design it yourself. Require that they generate multiple ideas for solving the problem. And then once they have generated those multiple ideas, they should argue the merits of their own ideas within their team. And then at that point, begin testing their ideas, building their prototypes, building their model to test. They have time to test it. Then they collect and analyze the data from this testing to evaluate their success. And then bring your whole group together and communicate as teams. And within this, I shift the jobs around within my group. So we have a student that's responsible for making sure the data is collected. We have a student that's responsible for making sure that records are kept. We have another student responsible for actually communicating these results out to the group. And these jobs should shift. It shouldn't be the same student doing the same thing all the time, because you want to develop the thinking skills and the communication skills with all of your students. And then finally, critical for the engineering part, give them time to go back and redesign. You want them to learn from their mistakes, and it's important to let them know that mistakes are okay. Mistakes will be made, but that is part of the learning process. Okay, so we're going to take a few minutes to talk about some of these resources. The first link that you see here is for the NGSS Dubai Forum. This was held last April, and this link, when you click on it, when you get the PowerPoint, will take you directly to that website. EGFI is a set of materials mainly geared for engineering. EGFI started out with, it's the acronym for Engineering Go For It. The nice thing about this is these lessons are already geared towards STEM. And they have a variety of lessons to pick and choose from. Mainly it is materials for teachers though. CPOMS is from the state of Florida in the United States. And when you go to this website, it's a little tricky to navigate, but at the top it has links that you can click on. And there is one that is titled MEAs, and MEA stands for Model Eliciting Activities. These are STEM lessons, and they're the models, and it takes them through entire units. And then they have them for different grade levels and different ability levels. So take the time just to explore that site a little bit, but it does have a lot on it, not just the STEM. MEAs is what you want to look at. A to Z Kids STEM series is for elementary school. And what it is, it's 26 activities geared to the 26 letters of the alphabet. And these are for the younger students. This would be your K4, K5 students, taking them through the foundations and the beginning steps for doing some engineering. NSTA STEM Classroom is a free service through NSTA. You do not have to be a member of the organization to access STEM Classroom, but this is actually a publication that they've been putting out since March of 2012, and it is published monthly. If you go to this website, they have all of the issues archived back to March 2012, and you can read the articles as well as look at the activities that go along with it. And those articles will give you a great deal of information to help you get started with this. One of the most important resources, and I believe Kevin is going to share the link with this one on how to get this, is the STEM integration in K-12 education. This is a publication that was put out by the NRC, the National Research Council, and it is available on the National Academies Press website. You can buy the book. However, the PDF is a free download on that website. And so I recommend that you download the PDF. The NRC is the same group of individual, or the same organization that actually put out the frameworks for science education, K-12 science education, which is the document that the NGSS standards are based on. And so this is great material. It takes you through several chapters. It shows you what a good program looks like. And so this one would be the background reading that I would do within my school before I began trying to do a lot with, just beginning the new implementation of STEM. But read this first. STEM is elementary is for elementary students, obviously. And it breaks it down into some basics as well and gives you some additional lessons. And then we've talked a little bit about how this becomes a big unit in real world problems. And you're going to have another webinar later this month on problem-based learning. But I did post a website that may possibly, be on that one as well. But it is, it's some great information. Whoops, sorry. It's some great information on beginning problem-based learning. And this is from the Buck Institute for Education. When you go into their website, there's a section for teachers, and it shows you the rubrics. It shows you the planning stages. This would be something that your teacher teams would need to look at as they're beginning to organize these problems for STEM lessons. Because, like I said, it gives you the planning pages and the templates to go through and make sure you have all of the components in place. The rubrics for scoring that you could go over with your students to make sure that they understand criteria and constraints. And then you can even do a search on their site, and they do have many projects that are already up that you can begin implementing within your classroom. And so you're not reinventing the wheel at this point. Instead, you're going in and actually seeing what you can do to get this in place in your classroom. You can tweak it and make it pertinent to what you're doing within your class. And then the Rube Goldberg link I've put on there as well. And this will actually let you go in, and it gives you information about Rube Goldberg. It has some photos and some other material that you can show the students. And then, like I said, if you want to do the Rube Goldberg thing with the older kids, you can actually take them in and do the full-blown competition as well. Okay, are there any additional questions? Okay, so the question, is this program designed to be standalone with all standards covered to replace currently used standards or to complement the standards already used in each school? To begin with, I would make it a complementary program because it's going to be hard to do everything within STEM. Although I would do as much as I could with STEM, especially with your science standards and with as many of your math standards as you could fit in. It won't replace everything, mainly because of the time. If you try to teach every single standard with STEM, you're not going to have enough time. But as much as you can, I would do 2 or 3 good, strong STEM units a semester. And that would then cover you, I think, to get the kids used to that type of thinking and that type of problem solving. Okay, any other questions? Well, I did include the KDSL web link. I also have my email on this final slide. This is my home email. Feel free to contact me at any time. I'm pretty good about getting back in touch with you. If you have specific questions that you would like addressed further, you can always email me, and I am more than willing to work with you on that. Anything I can do to make the transition smoother for you is my goal. Okay, another thing that you might want to do at this point, When you leave this webinar and you're back at school and working with your teachers, go into your PLC meetings, your grade level meetings, your department meetings. Begin looking at some of these materials. I do encourage you to use the Buck Institute materials for problem-based learning. The templates there would be an excellent place to start. Pull those out. Start brainstorming about real-world problems that you have within your area, things that you can do to get your students where they need to be within STEM education. Well, it has been wonderful sharing this information with you. And like I said earlier, if you have any questions or need any additional help, feel free to contact me and I will be happy to get back in touch with you, or contact Kevin and he can get in touch with me, whatever works best for you within your area. But it's been a great evening. Thank you very much.